Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be sharing a card using this brand new stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. This stamp set is called Blossoming. I started by stamping the large tree from the stamp set onto a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and I used my Gina K AMALGAM ink to do the stamping. I'm going to be coloring this image in using my Copic markers, and I have the marker caps off to the side there in case you want to know the colors that I'm using. For the trunk of the tree, I started out by taking my lightest shade and filling in the entire thing. Next, I took my medium shade and I started filling in where the shadows are going to be. Before I started filling in these shadows, I picked out a light source. I decided my light was going to be coming from the upper right-hand side, kind of behind the tree. And of course, I just chose that light source as kind of a guide for my coloring, and I didn't actually worry too much about it. If I got the lighting a little bit wrong, it didn't really bother me. I mostly just color and have fun with it. Once I finished laying out my shadows with the medium color, I took my darkest color and I deepened up those shadows along the edges. After that, I took my medium shade again and I blended the darker shade into the medium shade so that I have a nice transition in between those two colors. After that, I took my lightest shade marker and I worked on blending together the light shade and the medium shade, and this gives me a really nice even blend along the entire tree. Next, I started coloring in all of the flowers that are blossoming on the tree. This tree has a lot of really tiny details on it, so in order to do really well with my coloring, I had to take it pretty slow so that I didn't go out of the lines. I decided not to do any blending on these really tiny details because they're so small, so I don't think that the blending is really necessary, but I did want to use more than one color so that I have a little bit of shading. So after I finished filling in all of the flowers with the first pink color, I took a slightly darker shade and I added some shadows on the underside of each of the blooms. The next thing that I colored in were all of the tiny little leaves that are on the tree. When I was planning out the coloring for this tree, I knew that I wanted everything that's on the tree to be pink, but I didn't want it to all be exactly the same pink, so in order to kind of change things up, I used different shades of pink for all of the different elements that are on the tree. So for the leaves that I'm coloring in, I colored them in just a little bit darker than the flowers that I colored in. And just like with the flowers, I used two different colors of pink for the leaves, and I didn't do any blending because they are so small. The last element that's on the tree might be a little bit difficult to see because they are so tiny, but there are these tiny little blossoms, and for those I used an even darker shade of pink, and I only used one color for the blossoms because they are really tiny. Once that coloring was all done, I fussy cut the image out and I set it aside and I started working on this background panel. I'm blending together two different colors of Distress Oxide ink for this background. I'm using the colors Spun Sugar and Worn Lipstick. I'm blending these colors on a piece of Bristol Smooth paper, which I find is a really good paper for blending with the Distress Oxide inks. I find that it's really helpful to use a piece of scrap paper to hold down the panel so that you don't get any fingerprints on the panel while you're blending. I'm going to be turning this background into a shaker pocket using my fuse tool. A couple of things I always like to mention whenever I use my fuse tool. Be careful because it gets really hot, so you don't want to touch that top because you will burn yourself. Another thing is make sure you let it heat up for quite a while before you start using it, or it won't be hot enough and it won't quite fuse that plastic together and you'll end up with your plastic falling apart. The glitter that I'm using to fill up my shaker pocket is a large clear glitter, and I actually found this glitter at Walmart in the kids section. I also took out these clear micro pearls from Brutus Monroe, and I put a few spoonfuls of those into my shaker pocket. I've been really enjoying these lately for my shaker projects. I think that they look like tiny little bubbles. Once I had a decent amount of shaker bits inside of my pocket, I used my fuse tool in order to close up that top end. I want to mention that this background panel was cut to be 4 by 5 1/4. I find that this is a really good size for shaker panels made using the fuse tool. When you use the fuse tool, there's always going to be some extra plastic sticking out on the sides, so you need to plan for that if you want your background to fit onto an A2 size card base with nothing hanging off the edges. As you can see, I adhered my shaker pocket onto an A2 size card base using my ATG gun, and that little bit of extra space around the border is perfect to fit that extra plastic. Next, I took my tree and I glued it down to my shaker pocket using my Gina K Connect glue. Because I'm using a liquid adhesive and I'm gluing onto plastic, I do need to hold down that tree with my hands until the glue dries. You could also use a book and place it on top, and that'll keep it nice and flat until it dries. I picked out a sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm stamping that with Versamark ink onto some Simon Says Stamp SLATE cardstock, and I'm embossing it with Alabaster white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. I cut that sentiment down into a small strip, and I'm popping it up onto my card using some foam tape. Next, I thought I'd try a technique that I've never tried before, but I thought it would be pretty fun with this card. So I took my Glossy Accents and I added little dabs of it here and there pretty randomly all over the flower blooms. Next, I took out this Simon Says Stamp Unicorn Dust Glitter, and I've actually never used this before. I got it in the kit last month, so I had to take that seal off. And I'm going to use my little spoon in order to scoop some of this onto those little dots of Glossy Accents. This can be a little bit messy, but I tried to keep it contained by doing it over the top of a coffee filter. And when I was done adding the glitter, I shook off any of the excess into that coffee filter and then poured it back into the jar. After letting it dry for a little while, I did go over the whole thing with a paintbrush in order to get off any extra glitter that was hanging around. Next, I picked out a couple of sequins from the Heaven Sent sequin set from Lucy's Cards, and I'm gluing those around the sentiment using my Gina K Connect glue. For the final touches on the card, I first took my Wink of Stella glitter brush and I went over that sentiment strip, and then I took out my white gel pen and I added some highlights along the tree trunk, and then I decided to take that same white gel pen and add some dots all over the blossoms of the tree. This took a little while because I was just adding really small dots everywhere, but I really like the effect that it gives. Here's a closer look at the finished card, and you can see all of that shine and glitter. I really love how the shaker in the background kind of looks like there's a bunch of petals just kind of floating around. That's actually what I was going for and why I decided to do this shaker pocket. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed this card design featuring one of the new stamp sets from Simon Says Stamp. All of the supplies that I used for today's card can be found in the description down below. If you're new to my channel and you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I do new card videos every single week, and I'll be back with a new one really soon. Again, thank you for watching today. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a good day today.